Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. Welcome back to the subreddit saga. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into r/NoSleep. We have 3 scary stories found from across the front page of the internet. Get your popcorn ready. Our first story comes from user Genuinely Grim, and how they went digging through their wife's computer, and how he discovered much more than he bargained for. My wife forgot to delete her browser history. I can't believe what I found. 4:34 p.m. How to stop husband from cheating. I had only clicked on the history tab to delete the last thing I'd searched for when I noticed the entry. Hurriedly, I finished zipping up my fly and stared at it in bewilderment. Amy and I had been almost too careful. We had never so much as looked at one another in my wife's presence, let alone done anything that could have raised suspicion. There was no way she could have known what was going on, even if she had looked through my phone. With a heavy heart, I'd forced myself to delete any incriminating photos Amy sent me after I was done with them, and we had a strict call-only policy. Amy was our latest hire, and aside from being great at her job, she excelled in garnering male attention. Everyone loved her. She was strikingly beautiful and uninhibited to the point where her energy felt almost carnal, sending all morals and restraints out the window. I tried to ignore her at first, even finding excuses to go home early, but eventually, her charming giggle got the better of me, too. 4:37 p.m. How much does divorce cost? Droplets of sweat sprang out on my forehead. What? Was my wife planning to divorce me? But why? There was no way she knew about Amy and me. Was there someone else? Was she planning to accuse me of infidelity, all while going at it with some lover boy she'd met at her yoga class? 4:39 p.m. Why do humans feel emotions? I pursed my lips. If by some miracle my wife did know about the affair, I couldn't imagine the way she must have been feeling. I woke up late this morning and found a note on the kitchen table saying that she didn't want to wake me and that she was out doing her Saturday errands. I almost felt compelled to call her and, oh. I flinched as a large drop of blood landed on the keyboard. What the hell? My first instinct was to look up at the ceiling. Nothing. A strong metallic smell made me come to my senses. I brushed my hand against my face. A bright red smudge sat on my palm. I stared at it, alarmed. I'd never gotten nosebleeds before, aside from the time I got hit in the face with a football in high school. My head raised, I scrambled to my feet and made a dash for the bathroom, my hands cupping my throbbing nose. Once I had managed to stop the bleeding and cleaned myself up, I returned to the computer. 4:44 p.m. Which part of the brain is responsible for love? This was an oddly specific search. I couldn't recall my wife ever being interested in science or biology. I checked the account logged into the browser, just in case. Perhaps this was someone else's history altogether? Or maybe we'd been hacked? No. Seemed like everything was in order. My wife's smiling face stared back at me from the login window. What was she doing searching for brain parts anyway? 4:49 p.m. What is excerebration? What was excerebration? Some kind of fancy divorce? I'd never heard of the term in my life. I didn't even hesitate before clicking it, eager to find out what my wife was planning for us. I wish I hadn't. As the results came up on the monitor, my stomach lurched and my gag reflex kicked in. The images were graphic enough for my hand to automatically gravitate towards the return button, but a short paragraph in bold caught my eye. An ancient procedure involving chiseling through the bone of the nose in order to scoop out the brain matter. My heart hammering in my chest, I clicked the back button and scanned the rest of the entries. 5:01 p.m. Can a person live without the hypothalamus? 5:05 p.m. Location of the hypothalamus. 5:11 p.m. How much temazepam is safe? My skin crawled as I read, but I couldn't look away. I was so immersed that I didn't even hear the front door bang. Honey, I'm home. I stared at the wall, too shocked to reply. What was I meant to say? How was I supposed to ask her about all this? Hello? She called again, her heels clacking towards me. Hey, I choked, throwing the box of tissues into the drawer. How was... Oh, good, she smiled as she appeared in the doorway. How are you? You had quite a lot to drink last night. I stammered. I did? She studied me as though she wasn't sure whether I was joking or not. What's all this? I asked, gesturing to the computer screen. She joined me at the desk, frowning at the clammy wood surface. What? I pointed at the browsing history, my index finger shaking visibly in the air. Oh, she flushed, 2 pink spots appearing on her cheeks. Well, you did say we could try it, so I had to do a little research, you know? What? I said we could try what? Oh, she waved her hand dismissively. The X something. You probably know better. My blood ran cold. The excerebration. Karen, what did you do? But before she could say anything, a splash of blood landed on the carpet, and then another one, and another. Karen watched me, her skin growing pale. What? Suddenly, a small, fleshy lump escaped my nostril and rolled down the front of my shirt. We both stared at it in shocked silence. Then my wife screamed, turning on her heel to flee the room, but I caught up to her, pinning her against the wall. Tell me what the fuck you did! She tried to fight me, writhing under my grip, but I held on tight. Blood was streaming into my mouth and down my chin, staining both of our clothes. How can you not remember? She screeched, trying to elbow me in the ribs. Don't you remember what you did? I stared at her panic-stricken face, trying my best to recall any memories from the previous night. No! What did I do? You came home after work and told me you were leaving me for Amy, she sobbed. You said you didn't want to love her, but you did. I stood there quietly, mulling it over, as more pulp splashed onto my stomach. Ew! We need to call you an ambulance! Karen shrieked, trying to pull away. What the fuck is that? Then what happened? I demanded, my heart practically leaping out of my chest. Tell me what you did. What the fuck, John? She screamed. We got drunk, okay? We got really wasted, and then you said you knew of a way to fix this. To fix us. You said there's something called hypothalamus in your brain, and if removed, it would stop you from loving Amy. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. What the hell was she saying? Had she actually attempted to remove a part of my brain? And... Wait, I whispered. Who's Amy? Her expression made me feel foolish for not remembering. I knew that name. Amy. It sounded so familiar, and yet I couldn't for the life of me put my finger on it. What? What the fuck do you mean? She sounded bewildered. Amy, the girl you were cheating on me with for 6 months? I don't, I mouthed, releasing my wife and crumpling to the floor. I don't remember. Karen stared at me, her white blouse resembling a massacre, her mouth pressed into a thin line. What's happening to me? I whispered. She was silent for a moment, but I could see her eyes brimming with tears. Honey, what if I accidentally hit your hippocampus instead? What? That told me nothing. For fuck's sake, Karen, I'm not a fucking encyclopedia. Enlighten me. What the hell is a hippocampus? Nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. Honey, she sobbed, you're a doctor. It's the memory part of your brain. Ooh, scary. Our next story comes from user Mr. Frontenac and how they had a problem with the homeless in his neighborhood. The homeless in my neighborhood don't just want change. 2. Whole years ago, my wife Angie and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but a buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would be in rent every month. I'm sure this story is familiar to some of you, and we went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by a multinational investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, although it left me questioning where society was headed. How is this legal? I went to school. I paid off debt. I got a good job. I did everything right to still get priced out the fucking city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains, but after setting our sights on the city's less desirable neighborhoods, we finally got our home. On June 1st, we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patinated like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground, and scribbled on the walls were strange spirals and crude faces. Kids! The realtor had said like she knew who drew the markings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So, sure, the kitchen had composite counters, and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here." But we had a home, and a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing, and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth, and me and the wife got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to. But whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quick, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point, and we played, human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken while fireworks go boom or pop. As for the poop, let's just say that we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There was a homeless problem there for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall, dark stump. I don't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped, and I dropped the bowl where it crashed in the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. The cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar starred across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaven and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes. "You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but still his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please," I murmured, "please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he were a giant parting his way through the woods. "Yeah?" I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm going to take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property! If you don't leave, I'm calling the police!" The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey," I started over to them. "This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fella around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry to waste your time." I turned to go. No. One of them was waving me back. "You talking about a really big motherfucker?" The man raised his hand to signify. "Yay high? Black coat? Nasty scars?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Well, that's Tall Frank. What you want to about him? You see him in your recycling?" "No, why?" "Tall Frank's a can man. He makes his living that way." I nodded. "He was acting weird in my backyard last night." "Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self?" "No, he was staring at me from outside. When I went out, he tried to say something, or mouth something." Both of their brows rose. "You saying that Tall Frank tried to communicate with you?" "Yeah." They both looked at each other. "Tall Frank talks to nobody, and by talks I mean communicating in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again." The other chimed in. "That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago. No one knows where he came from, and the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legend to those scars. Some say it was dog that bit him, but I never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank?" Well, that's what my mama would call him." He leaned closer to me. "She used to tell me to watch my tongue, or Tall Frank'll take it." He chuckled to himself. "What do you think he wanted with me?" They both shrugged. "No clue, but you be sure to tell us when you find out." They bent back to their work, and I thanked them and went on far less assured than when I'd first set out. _______. The next several days, there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket filling the teapot at the sink when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. "Hey!" My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. "What do you want with me?" Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. "Hey, just leave us alone!" I stepped cautiously after him. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. "You! I don't ever want to see you back here again!" With our difference in size and the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked to him like some angry hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. "I'm not fucking sitting." He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope. Then he put the letter in his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another. "What are those?" He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them and stepping back. "What are these?" I muttered, already distracted. They had both been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to my side and stared at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letterhead read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. "The pills." I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Angie is trying to kill me? Suddenly I realized tall Frank's arm was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. "The things you can learn from people's recycling," I said. Tall Frank nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my wife appeared in the window. She twisted something in her fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later, I heard the back door open. "Honey, are you out here?" Angie called. "I made you some tea." I guess the homeless around her don't always want change. Sometimes they might want to save your life. Our last story comes through user Disco Dingus and how he befriended a fog as a young lad. When I was a little boy, I befriended a frog who lived at the bottom of the garden. I was 6 years old when my mom and I moved in with Nana. Mom and Dad were always arguing and sometimes there was hitting, so she took me and left. Nana loved us, but she also loved solitude. I could always tell when I'd ask too many questions or was playing too loudly, so I'd take myself outside, weather permitting, and leave her in peace. That's how I met Solomon. It was many years ago, but this is how 6-year-old me remembers the experience. Mom was at work. Nana had her feet up, smoking a cigarette as she watched morning television. I was playing on the floor with toy cars. I'd received a road mat the previous Christmas, and despite it now being summer, I still wasn't bored of it. I pushed the cars around the printed city, making sound effects. "Ben," said Nana, not angry but stern. I looked up, her matter-of-fact expression telling me everything. "Sorry, Nana," I said. She smiled and it warmed her. "It's all right, sweetheart, but Nanny's trying to watch telly." I nodded. "I think I'll go play outside." "All right, come here," she said in a cloud of smoke, planting a big wet kiss on my cheek. "Don't go near the pond, remember?" "I won't, Nana," I said as I wiped my face. One thing about living there was I had no friends. There were no kids anywhere near our house. I had started primary school, but the few kids I played with there lived too far away. So I had to entertain myself. It was a great garden. Lots of space to run around, roll around, climb trees. There was even a blackberry bush. Nana said I was allowed to eat a few a day, but I had to wash them first because of bugs and bird poo. You also had to be very careful when picking them because they grew on thorny stalks. At the very bottom of the garden was a pond. It wasn't too big, maybe 2 meters wide at most. There used to be fish in it, but when they died, Nana didn't get new ones. Granddad used to like the fish. Nana wasn't too fussed. It had become a bit wild, taken over by algae and water beetles. I had a football that I'd kick around sometimes. After I'd picked and eaten a few blackberries, having washed them under the outside tap, I looked around for it. It was floating on the surface of the pond. "Oh no," I said to myself, like it was the end of the world. I looked back at the house and pictured Nana engrossed in her programs. I decided that she would never know. It was too far to reach by hand with my little arms, but a long stick would help. There were plenty of those to be found. So I grabbed one and stood about a foot away from the edge of the pond. It had a kind of swampy, humid smell to it. There were sections where the algae separated, and there was an abundance of life to be seen. Lots of tiny creatures swimming, wriggling, squirming. Very few kids have the ability to think logically. Or that's my excuse anyway. In hindsight, I should have just laid on my front to take away any danger of falling in. I think in my head, I didn't like the idea of my face being too close to the water. It looked kind of gross. So foolishly, I tried to reach it by bending over and stretching my arms. And that's when I toppled over. Up to that point, I'd never been to a pool. I'd never even been to a beach and paddled in the sea. The biggest expanse of water I'd ever been in was the bathtub. I couldn't swim. The most frustrating thing about that was how close the edge looked as my head tried to stay above the surface. My legs kicked out. My arms flailed. It's crazy how quickly your energy drains. I tried to scream for Nana, but I kept swallowing mouthfuls of stagnant, lukewarm water. I panicked, my head dropping below the surface. I'd emerge briefly, feeling clumps of algae stuck to my face before going back under. Eventually, it went dark. And then it wasn't again. I was choking up water, laying a few feet away from the pond, soaking wet. I took in long, deep breaths as I stared into the bright blue sky. I closed my eyes and started to feel tears coming on. Then came a voice. "Don't cry, little one." It sounded like a man, but it wasn't a deep voice like my dad's. It was soft and kind. It reminded me a little of my teacher, Mr. Woods. He always sounded cheerful. I turned my head from side to side, perched on my elbows. "Down here!" There was a frog sitting on my chest, softly croaking. Just a normal greenish-yellow frog with mottled skin. Its mouth was kind of upturned into a smile. A water beetle scurried in front of it, and its tongue quickly flicked out to eat it. "Excuse me," it said, swallowing it down. I sat up and it hopped off my chest. Did you just speak?" I asked, confused. It nodded slowly, the pale skin under its chin inflating like a balloon as it breathed. "I did," it said. "Are you feeling better?" "Frogs can't talk," I said, pinching my arm. It hurt. I wasn't dreaming. The frog chuckled warmly. "Well, technically I'm not a frog, I am. But that's not what I would have called myself. That's what your kind call me." I lowered my head a little, getting a closer look. "What do you mean, my kind?" "Well, people. Humans. You are human, aren't you?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm a boy." It laughed. "I thought you might be. Do you have a name, little one?" I nodded again. "Ben, what's your name?" "Nice to meet you, Ben. I don't have a name, sadly." I frowned. "Why not?" Its front legs moved up slightly like a shrug. "It's just not something we do. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only one of my kind who can talk like this. My mother couldn't have given me a name if she tried." "How can you talk?" I asked inquisitively, shifting down lower. I laid on my front and put my hands under my chin. It shook its head. "Sometimes strange things happen in this world that can't be explained. I'm one of those strange things, I guess. If you're the only frog who can talk, that means you're special." Its little mouth turned up at the corners. "That's a very sweet way to put it, thank you, Ben. I can tell that you're special too." I shook my head. "No, I'm not. Everyone who I know can talk." The frog laughed warmly. "Oh, Ben, that's not the only thing that makes something special. You're special in other ways." "Like how?" "Well, maybe you're special because you can hear me?" I looked up to think about it, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. I've never ever heard of anyone who can talk to a frog before. Honestly, I don't think many can." I got a little closer. "Can I touch your skin?" Its mouth opened as it laughed. "Why on earth would you want to do that?" "My friend Henry Collins said frogs feel slimy." "Well, that's just rude," it said. "I'm sure this Henry Collins is slimy himself." I laughed, shaking my head. "No, silly. He's like me." "For all I know, you're slimy too," it said. "I'm not. Feel." I held out my hand palm side up, just in front of it. It hopped a little closer. Then one of its little webbed feet pressed down on one of my fingers. There was a slight cool sensation. "Well, definitely not slimy," it said. "See, I told you. Now it's my turn." It sighed. "Very well, but be gentle. I'm a lot smaller than you." "I will." I stroked its back with my forefinger. It shook its body a little like a happy dog. "Oh my, that tickles a bit," it said, laughing. "I wouldn't say you're slimy," I said. "I'm certainly glad to hear it," said the frog. "But you feel kind of wet, and a bit squidgy." It gasped. "Well, sorry to tell you this, Ben, but you're a bit squidgy too." I laughed and rolled onto my back. "You're funny." The frog shook its head, but smiled regardless. "Oh, to be a child." "Ben!" came a loud voice from behind. It was Nana, standing on the back doorstep with a cigarette. My heart jumped a little as I sat up. "Yes, Nana? I told you to stay away from that pond." I looked back. I was a few feet away from it. "I'm not that close, Nana." She took a drag and blew a big cloud of smoke. "I don't care. Get away from it now." Then she went back in the house. "Oh dear," said the frog. "I might have just gotten you into trouble." I shook my head. "No, I did that myself. I was silly and fell in because I was too close." I paused and got lower again. "Wait, did you see how I got out?" The frog shook its head. "Can't say I did, but I'm glad you're all right." I accepted it as just one of those things. "I better go or I will be in trouble." I sat up. "Are you always here?" It nodded and turned its head to the pond. "Yes, that's my home. Please come and see me again sometime." I nodded. "Definitely, but I'll have to be careful Nana doesn't see me." It laughed warmly again. "I understand. Just to be safe, maybe it's best if you don't tell Nana or Mom or even Henry Collins about me. They might not understand." Does that sound reasonable? I nodded. I don't think anyone would believe me anyway. It gave a slight nod. I think you're right. I got up to leave, brushing bits of grass off my front. My clothes were already drying due to the temperature. Ben, the frog said. I looked down. Would you do something for me? I nodded. Sure. I don't think it will be too difficult for you, but I'd love you to give me a name. You mean I get to decide what your name is? I said excitedly. It nodded. Absolutely, I'd really like that. Unless you're going to call me something silly like Froggy or Hoppy, I wouldn't like that. I laughed. I won't, I promise. Good. Well, next time we see each other, hopefully I'll have a name. I nodded. You definitely will. I'll think really hard about it. I look forward to it. Goodbye for now, little one, I waved. Bye, Froggy, I said, giggling. It shook its head but laughed along with me. Oh, Ben, you really are something else. A few weeks passed. I'd spent plenty of time in the garden, sometimes near the pond, too. But I didn't see the frog, and it was a little disappointing. One day I came home from school. Mom couldn't always pick me up, so it wasn't unusual for her to arrange a taxi to collect me. I walked through the front door and could hear sniveling. Mom, Nana, I called. In here, darling, I heard Mom say from the living room. I walked in. Her eyes were puffy and red. She held a scrunched-up tissue. What's wrong, Mummy? I asked. She held out her open arms, and I accepted them, feeling my eyes fill up. Part of me knew already. It's Nanny, she said as she hugged me. She's gone to heaven, darling. The house felt different without Nana. But no matter how much Mum cleaned around, there always seemed to be the smell of cigarette smoke. It wasn't unpleasant. It offered a strange kind of comfort. It was almost like she was still there. Mum and I were lucky to have the house. It was paid for in full. But Mum still had to work. Sometimes I'd have a babysitter, a nice lady called Sarah who lived in one of the houses down the road. But sometimes that wasn't an option. I know she felt terrible about it, but my mum would leave me on my own on those occasions. Promise me you'll be a good boy, she'd say. Don't do silly things. Be safe. I'd always promise and always meant it. On one of those days, I was playing in the garden. It had been maybe a month since I'd seen the frog, but I was so happy when I heard his soft little voice. Ben! He was sat around a foot from the edge of the pond. I ran over excitedly. Whoa, slow down, little one, he said. Be safe, remember? We don't want you falling in again. I slowed to a normal pace and nodded, sitting cross-legged in front of him. Sorry, I was excited to see you. He laughed. That's sweet of you, and you don't need to apologize. I just feel it's my duty to look out for you when no one else is around. I sighed and nodded. He looked up at me. Your mom is doing the best she can. She loves you very much. It's all for you. I felt a little tear in my eye and wiped it away. I know. It's just sometimes I miss her. And I miss Nana. The frog hopped closer, then leapt onto my knee. It made me smile. I'm so sorry about Nana, little one. Don't ask me how I know these things, but I can tell you she's nearby in some way. She's a bit mad that you're this close to the pond, but she's happy you've got me as a friend. I cried, but they were mostly happy tears. Dry your eyes, little one. You've got a big job to do today. Do you know what? I shook my head. No, I've already tidied my room. I washed up my cereal bowl. I picked up my cars from the floor. The frog laughed. No, I'm not talking about boring jobs like that. This is a very, very important and meaningful job. Tell me, I said excitedly. You need to do me the honor of naming me. I took in a big breath. Oh, yes, and I have a name already. A good one. Its little mouth smiled again. Oh my, I can't wait to hear it. My Nana and I used to watch a particular film together quite a lot. As a kid, I loved it. I need you to remember that. I was a kid, because it's a bad film. But kids aren't as critical and cynical as adults. They can see past the flaws and focus on the best bits. That's my excuse anyway. King Solomon's Mines. Not only a shameless Indiana Jones ripoff, but shockingly bad all around. It was my Nana's favorite film, mainly because she thought Richard Chamberlain was so handsome. Sometimes it got a little inappropriate, but being a kid, it would go straight over my head. I loved your grandfather, but the things I'd let him do to me. Little did we know back then that my Nana would have never stood a chance. I loved the film for very different reasons. Not only because it was our film, but for the sense of adventure. I didn't understand a lot of it, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. At the time, it seemed like the only fitting name, and it would honor my Nana's memory, too. Solomon, I said with a smile. I'm naming you Solomon. The frog looked at me curiously, turning his head from side to side. Solomon, Then it smiled. It's perfect. I clapped my hands. Yay, I'm so happy you like it. I never doubted you, he said. I'm proud to call myself Solomon. So now if anyone asks what your name is, you can tell them. He nodded. I can indeed, though I don't think that opportunity will come up very often. You're still the only thing I've ever spoken to. I gently stroked his back with my finger, and he closed his eyes with a smile. Do you think you'll ever talk to anyone else? He looked up at me. Honestly, I don't think I'll ever meet anyone else special enough. A few days went by, and seeing Solomon was a given. I was happy to have him as a friend, and I appreciated that he didn't always treat me like a child. He'd tell me things as they were, truths that most adults would hide or sugarcoat. But I always felt he had an underlying responsibility to look out for me too. I was a child, and I could act like one. One day we were chatting about school. I was laying on my back and Solomon sat on my chest like the first day I met him. He cut me off mid-sentence, tapping his little webbed foot. He turned his head to face the house. Sorry, little one. Something's not right. I perched up on my elbows. What is it, Solomon? I could see a change in his expression. He looked concerned. He had this amazing ability to show emotions like we do. Ben, someone's coming. Someone you'll recognize. I need you to know that whatever happens right now, you'll be safe. Do you understand? I sat up, and Solomon leapt onto the grass. You're scaring me, Solomon. I don't mean to, little one. It might get scary, but believe me, you'll be safe. My breathing started to get heavier, and I felt butterflies in my stomach. Solomon hopped closer and rested a foot on my hand. Look at me, Ben. I looked down. My breathing stuttered. Do you trust me? My lips trembled a little, but I nodded. I did trust him, as much as I trusted my mom or Mr. Woods. Good boy, he said. I heard a loud noise come from inside the house. It made me gasp. Remember, you'll be safe. I'll always be honest with you, but you need to go see who it is. I sniveled a bit and nodded, standing up slowly and turning to the house. I started walking. I'm here, little one, he called from behind. I walked closer to the house, hearing the sound of furniture moving around. Every now and then I heard an expletive. I did recognize the voice. It was my dad. I hadn't seen him since we moved into Nana's house. I didn't want to. He wasn't nice to Mom. I walked into the back door and through the kitchen, following the sounds of disturbance. They took me to the living room where he was rummaging through drawers. It took him some time to notice I was there. He jumped when he saw me. Jesus fucking Christ, Ben! My hands shook a little. I didn't like it when he used bad words. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice wavering. He shook his head. Hello to you too, boy. Where's your mother? She was at work. I couldn't lie and say she was home, so I said nothing. He laughed. She's not here, is she? The worthless bitch left you on your own. That's negligence. Leaving my fucking son unsupervised. Who does she think she is? Stop saying bad things about Mum, I shouted, my whole body trembling. She's got you fucking wrapped around her little finger, hasn't she? He started to step closer. I backed up. What lies has she been feeding you, huh? Turning my own son against me? She didn't tell me anything, I cried. I heard the things you said. I saw what you did. He shook his head and grinned in a sarcastic way. Right. Well, you're a little kid and have a wild imagination. She's twisted it. I didn't do shit. I slowly stepped back through the hallway as he etched closer. Anyway, I heard the mother bitch is 6 feet under. There's got to be some cash around here. That Scrooge hated spending money. Unless it was for a pack of John Player specials, huh? I shook my head. There's nothing. He smiled. Well, I'll just have to keep looking on my own then. There's nothing, I shouted. Stop saying bad things. Get out. The phone was on a little table by the staircase. It was just behind me. I ran to it and started dialing 999. It was a rotary dial, and each 9 took forever to make its way round. I'd barely managed 2 before he snatched it out of my hand. You little shit, he sneered, pushing me back against the staircase. What the fuck do you think the police are gonna do? They'll take you away, is that what you want? I started crying and hit out at him, but he just laughed. "I hate you," I sniveled. "I wish you wasn't my dad." As if by magic, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. It was enough to spook him, his head turning towards the front door, then back to the phone. "No, it couldn't have. That's not possible." It was a miraculous coincidence, but he fell for it. I just stared at him, shaking. "You know what? I bet you're not even mine anyway. Your slut mother couldn't keep her legs shut." He backed up to the front door and opened it. "Yeah, there's no way a little cunt like you is mine." He left and slammed the door behind him. The word he used was genuinely new to me, so it didn't have the desired impact. It confused me, but I figured it wasn't very nice anyway. My trembling legs carried me down to the bottom of the garden. Solomon was there. He hopped closer as I got near the pond. "Are you all right, little one?" he asked. I nodded but fell to my knees and cried. "He didn't hurt you, did he?" I shook my head. "No, I believed you. It was scary, but I believed you." He patted his little foot on my knee. "You're a very brave boy." When Mom came home, I had to explain to her what had happened. She panicked and held me tighter than she ever had before. If anything good came from it, it's that she told me she would never leave me alone again. I helped her clear up the mess Dad had made. I asked her if she was going to call the police, and there was a flash of consideration in her eyes. But she decided against it. That night when I went to bed, it started to rain. I could hear it tapping against my window. I always loved that sound. It was comforting. It hadn't rained for weeks, which was strange for the UK. I awoke late. A sudden bright flash emanated from behind the curtains, followed by a loud crack of thunder. It startled me. I've never been afraid of a storm, but it took me off guard. It must have been what woke me up. I opened my curtains just enough to see the rain coming down hard. Then I watched in awe as the forks of lightning spread across the night sky. I blinked hard as the next crack of thunder struck, laughing to myself. As the next flash came, I looked down to see Solomon's pond rippling. I thought about how happy he'd be swimming around in the rain. I ran back into my room as I heard my dad on the staircase, slamming the door shut. There was a chest of drawers just to the side, and being young and stupid, I thought I might be able to push it over to stop him from getting in. The reality was, it didn't move an inch. He burst in, making me scream. "Time to be with your whore mother," he snarled, swinging the hammer down. I managed to duck out of the way, and it smacked into the side of the drawers. I was on my hands and knees crawling to my bed. I wanted to go underneath it like it would fool him. That silly, childish logic again. I didn't get far, though. He picked me up by the scruff of my Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas. He held me up by one hand, the other holding the hammer high above. The lightning revealed strands of blonde hair matted to the head with blood. He grinned in such an evil, hateful way. "You know how I know you're not really mine? I have no problem with bashing your tiny little skull in." I grabbed onto his wrist for support. His clenched fist was just in front of my face. I wanted to try and bite it, but I knew I couldn't reach. So I did the next best thing. As the hammer rose higher, I kicked out as hard as I could with my left foot. I got him good between the legs. The pain I felt in my bare toes was excruciating, but it paid off. He dropped me and fell back, groaning as he let go of the hammer and held his crotch. But of all the places he could have rested, it had to be against the door. I jumped on my bed and threw my curtains open, scrambling to open the window. My dad was moaning behind me. "You little fucker," he said. It was a pitch higher than normal. The window opened outwards, my face splashed with rain. I looked down and could just make out the roof of the little extension that was part of the kitchen. The lightning gave me an even better look. It didn't look like too much of a drop, but it was scary enough to make me hesitate. "You're dead, boy!" he screamed, lunging for the hammer and then throwing himself on the bed. I screamed and hung backwards from the window, my hands gripping onto the ledge. The rain came down hard on my face, but I could make out his blurry outline. The flash in the sky showed him looming over me, and as the next thunderclap came, the hammer came down. It caught my wrist. I barely had time to acknowledge the pain, then I was falling. I hit the roof feet first, toppled over, then rolled down the slightly slanted tiles until I met the edge. I tried to cling on to something, but my hands wouldn't grip, slipping with a combination of water and slimy rooftop moss. I hit the back garden hard, knocking the wind out of me. If it hadn't been raining, it might have been worse. The sodden grass somewhat cushioned my fall. That being said, I was frozen for a good few seconds as I tried to catch my breath. As soon as that was under control, that's when I really started to notice the pain in my wrist and toes. I managed to roll over and get to my feet. The back garden was darker than the house, but every flash helped me see the way. I held my wrist to my chest, supporting it with my other hand, and limped in the direction of Solomon's pond. My tears were indistinguishable from the rain. My body was as wet as it had been on the day I met Solomon and almost drowned. My dad's voice roared from somewhere behind me, making me take in a sharp breath. "I'm coming for you, boy. No one will recognize you when I'm done crushing your face." I darted into the greenery on my left, ducking down. I crawled in, wincing as I put pressure on my bad wrist. I didn't stop until I felt a sharp pain on my right shoulder. It was a thorn. I was in one of blackberry bushes. I sat up and turned around, pulling my knees up to my chest for comfort. Then I slowly rocked myself as my lips trembled. When lightning struck, I saw my dad looking around the garden. The hammer was constantly raised above his head. He poked his head inside bushes, looked behind trees. He smashed the windows of the little garden shed we had and was adamant he'd found me, screaming with anger when he realized I wasn't inside. "Get your fucking arse out here now!" Every crack of thunder made me jump like I wasn't expecting it. My dad turned his head to the sky and roared along with it like a taunt, an intimidation. I closed my eyes tight and continued to slowly rock. As my dad started to move over to my side of the garden, there appeared to be another miracle. The second of the day. The storm must have been testing the electricals of the house, and something triggered the fuse box. Most of the lights went out. It got his attention. "Gotcha!" he yelled, and ran up the garden. The next flash revealed he'd gone back in the house. I slowly crawled out of the bush and got to my feet, heading left and limping the last few steps to the pond. I was exhausted and in more pain than I'd ever experienced before. But hearing Solomon's voice made everything feel better. For just a moment. "Little one?" I couldn't see him at first, but I could tell I was close to the pond by the sound of the rain as it hit the surface. With a flash, I saw him there on the edge. I fell to my knees and collapsed to my side. "Solomon!" I cried, reaching out with my good hand. I held it upright and he hopped onto it with a croak. "Little one, we don't have much time." I took in a stuttered breath. "He killed my mom," I cried. "He killed my mom, Solomon." He patted my hand with one of his webbed feet, shaking his head. "No, Ben. In time, she will make a full recovery." I sniveled. "How do you know?" "Because I'm special, remember? I also know you've broken 2 of your left toes, and your left wrist is fractured." My jaw dropped. My mouth splashed with rain. "How?" "I just do, little one. Your mother will be fine. Trust me." I bawled, but it was mostly relief. I believed him. "He's still here, Solomon. He's trying to get me." He gently tapped on my hand. "I know, little one, but I can help you." I got up to kneel, and Solomon leapt from my hand. By that point, I wasn't only shivering from fear, but cold. The rain wasn't letting up. "How?" I asked. "Are you feeling brave?" I shook my head. "No, I'm scared, Solomon. He's going to hurt me like he hurt Mom." He hopped closer and patted my knee. "I won't let him, Ben, but I need you to be a big, brave boy. Can you do that?" I looked over my shoulder, the house briefly illuminated in a flash. Then the lights went back on. It made my heart jump. "Please, little one, be brave." I turned back and nodded, but I didn't feel brave at all. My stomach churned. What should I do? Something scary. "I need you to bring your father to me." I held my bad hand to my chest. "How, Solomon? He'll hurt me before I have the chance." He shook his head. "Not if you're fast and clever. I know you're clever." I started crying again. "But I'm just a little boy." Solomon sighed. "Oh, Ben, I wish I could hug you. You're so much more than just a little boy. Before I met you, I was just a little frog. But you made me special because you are special. Believe in yourself, little one." I mustered a small smile and stroked Solomon on his back. "We make each other special, don't we?" He smiled and croaked. "Exactly. Now bring your father to me. You can do it. Fast and clever." I gulped, wiped my nose with the back of my good hand, and nodded. By that point, the thunder no longer made me jump. That made me feel somewhat brave. I slowly stood up and Solomon leapt to the edge of his pond. Turning, I started walking up the garden. The soft, wet ground squidged between my toes and soothed the broken ones a little. "Ben," called Solomon. I looked over my shoulder. "Thank you for being my friend." I smiled as best as I could under the circumstances, giving him a slight nod. I didn't say anything, but I didn't have to. Solomon and I had a connection. My heart was filled with warmth in that moment, and it spurred me on. I watched as Solomon turned and hopped into the pond with a splash. Then I started preparing for the scariest thing in my life. The back door was open. It was eerily quiet inside. A small part of me had hoped that my dad had left, but I couldn't be sure. I picked up a small saucepan that sat on the counter, my hand trembling. Then I banged it on a cupboard door. "Dad!" I called. "I'm here!" It didn't take long at all. Within a few seconds, I heard heavy footsteps on the floorboards. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway. The hammer was by his side. He grinned. "Oh, I'm gonna enjoy this." He raised the hammer and lunged forward. The first thing I did was throw the saucepan in his direction. That hadn't been planned, but felt like a wasted opportunity if I didn't. It barely touched him, but it was worth a try. I turned and ran, going as fast as I could given my foot injury. It didn't take long to hear a thump and a painful yell, and I allowed myself to look over my shoulder. I'd crushed blackberries all over the doorstep, making it slippery. My dad was laying on the ground, writhing around. It had given me a small advantage. "Fuck you!" he screamed, getting to his feet. I gasped as I turned back to face the back of the garden. My little toes were so painful, but I still ran as fast as I had in the 100m race on my school's sports day. At least it felt like it. But I knew my dad was twice, maybe even 3 times faster than me. It wouldn't take him long to catch up. The lightning flashed, and it guided my way, showing me what I needed to do next. As I heard my dad closing in, I jumped. I landed on the wet grass with a little slip, but managed to compose myself and kept running. I heard another yell and looked over my shoulder again. My dad was laying on the ground again, swearing. We had a pile of logs in the shed for winter fires, and I'd placed some in the garden. "Ben!" he screamed, getting to his feet. "I'm gonna start by smashing in your fucking teeth!" I turned back and kept running, relying on the lightning again. The thunder roared, but I could still hear my dad behind me. I jumped over another log, but that one didn't stop him. He was looking out for them now. My last attempt at slowing him down was coming up, though he'd need to be closer for that to work. Not that I needed to slow down, I was practically within his grasp. He laughed maniacally, and I could hear the hammer as it swiped through the air. I jumped again, but this time I didn't land straight away. There was a branch sticking out from my favorite climbing tree, and I used it to swing myself a little further ahead. When I let go, it swung back and smacked my dad in the face. He screamed as he came to a halt. "Your eyes!" he yelled as I ran with all I had. That was the last of my obstacles. "I'm gonna start by gouging out your eyes!" I felt panic rising inside as I sprinted the final stretch to Solomon's pond. My bad hand clung to my chest, feeling my heart beating hard beneath it. My dad wasn't too far behind now, and there was nothing between us. With a flash of light, I saw the pond. But I saw something else too that gave me a little fright. Protruding slightly from the surface were 2 big, glowing eyes. Then they raised up slightly to reveal a wide mouth that was upturned in the corners like a smile. As the thunder rumbled, I heard a deep croak, and the pale flesh below the mouth inflated intermittently. The eyes were fixed onto mine, and with a final flash of light before I reached the pond, the large head motioned to the sky. I understood. My dad had stopped speaking hateful words and instead screamed in a constant fit of rage. I took a deep breath and leapt as my toes reached the edge of the pond, landing in the middle of the squidgy wet head. It flicked up slightly to spring me to the other side where I landed straight on my arse. I had just enough time to turn and see my dad's terrified reaction as Solomon emerged from his pond in a geyser of water. Solomon roared and shot out his large tongue. It wrapped around my dad's ankles and pulled him over. I watched in disbelief as he dropped the hammer and tried to claw at the soft ground. Solomon began to retreat back underwater. My dad's screams were more terrifying than the disturbing threats he'd hissed throughout the evening. All I could see was the very top of Solomon's head as my dad was pulled into the water, his lower legs submerged. "Help me!" he screamed, his hands tearing at patches of grass. He turned to look over his shoulder, at the face of what was to end his violent attack. My dad was as pale as snow, his nose bloody from the tree. I heard a loud croak as Solomon raised out of the water, then closed his mouth around my dad's waist. He smacked at Solomon's head as he struggled, but I could see him becoming visibly weaker as I heard the sound of crushing bones. Finally, my dad's eyes met mine. I can't be sure, but I think I saw the moment that life left them. They just appeared to be void of any emotion as Solomon dragged him to the depths, and the pond became deathly still. Just a few weeks ago, I happened to be in the area of my Nana's old house. I've long since moved away, as has my mum, who is as fit and healthy as you'd expect a 70-something to be. I pulled up outside and took a deep breath as I looked upon it with mixed emotions. The exterior hadn't changed a great deal. The windows were more modern, that was about it. The front door opened and a woman came out, walking down the garden path. I shut off the engine and stepped out of my car. "Can I help you?" she asked cheerfully. "Are you lost?" I smiled. "No, actually I grew up here. I was just reminiscing." She beamed. "Oh, that's wonderful. You must come inside." I was grateful for her offer, and she took me on a little tour of the house. I was amazed by how different it looked. The last time I'd seen the inside of that house was around the early 90s, where it had the same decor as always. It was very much a family home. There were 2 children's bedrooms and various family photos dotted around. I got a little lump in my throat seeing my old room. The woman could tell by my reaction that it used to be mine, lightly touching my arm. As we went back downstairs, she offered me a hot drink, to which I politely declined. But my eyes fell onto the kitchen window and the now completely landscaped back garden. "Do you still have the pond?" I asked. She nodded. "Oh, yes. My husband keeps koi. Do you mind if I take a look?" She smiled. "Be my guest. I'm making tea. I won't take no for an answer." I stepped outside. There was no longer grass as you left the doorstep, but a modern patio with outdoor furniture. The old shed had been replaced with what looked like a small annex. There was a large trampoline in the center of the garden. 6-year-old me would have loved that. As I approached the garden's end, the pond came into view. It was beautifully maintained. The edge was decorated with rocks. There was even a mini waterfall. I crouched down and watched the koi kiss the shimmery surface. My heart filled and I felt my eyes glaze over, having not thought about that pond for some time. There was a croak to my left. I looked down to see a little frog hop towards me. It made me smile. "Hello, you," I said, lightly stroking its back. It made no attempt to hop away. It looked up at me, and I swear its little mouth looked like it was smiling. I got more comfortable and held out my hand palm side up. The frog willingly hopped on top. My heart jumped. I brought it closer to my face and studied it. It had been years since I'd seen Solomon, and with no offense intended, I wasn't sure I'd be able to tell him apart from any other frog. And given their short lifespan, he'd probably be long dead already. But Solomon wasn't like other frogs. He was special, and this was curious behavior. "Solomon?" I said quietly, paranoid I'd be heard by the welcoming woman. It just looked at me and croaked contently. "It's me, Ben." A part of me was preparing for a response. I wasn't sure how adult me would react to that, but there came none. Just a pleasant little expression on its face as it croaked. I let out a little laugh. "Once upon a time, there was a very special frog who lived here. I know it sounds silly, but he was the best friend I ever had. I never got to thank him for what he did for my mom and I, so I'll say it to you. Thank you, Solomon." I felt tears in my eyes as I shook it off, preparing to put the frog down. But it moved closer to my face and placed its little webbed foot on my nose, tapping lightly. The woman in the house seemed genuinely warm, as I'm sure her husband is too. But I knew in my heart, if either of them turned out to be monsters, their children would be safe for as long as they lived here. What an amazing lineup. Thank you once again for listening to the subreddit saga. Remember, if you would like us to read your stories, leave them in the comments below for a chance to be featured. Have a wonderful morning, noon, or night wherever you are. We will see you next time.